Welcome, everybody. This is the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley. And every week we bring you the story of people who do little things, big things, all kinds of things to make the world a better place. We're part of Rotary International, well over 1 million Rotarians and Rotaractors in 36,000 clubs around the world, dedicated to service above self. That idea that giving your time, talent, and treasure to an organization and a group that finds things in the community that we look at and we say, we can make a difference there. That's a good way to spend your time. And if you're interested in learning more about Rotary, you can go to Rotary, Rotary.org. Or if you want to find out about our club specifically, you can go to Rotary.cool. And that will get you to us. We're at SiliconValleyRotary.com. In today's recording, what we are going to do is we're going to talk to George Vierra. Now, George is someone who has spent over 5 decades studying wine. He knows the wine. He knows more about the wine history than most of the population of the planet. He's probably forgotten more about wine than most of us will ever know. And we're excited for him to tell us a little bit about the history of wine. If you want to learn more about his biography, the recent history of wine, I should say. If you want to learn more about his biography, you can pause this recording or podcast and go back to the page where you are finding it and learn in detail about the kinds of things that he shares. You'll also find a link that has his many papers. He's one of the top 3% of contributors and people read on academia. And so exciting to have so many resources and this story to share. So with that, George, I'd like to hand it over to you. Thank you for taking your time to be with us, and welcome to the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley.
Thank you, kind sir. I think it's going to be lots of fun. And again, as I told you both, to preface it, that this is going to be primarily not technical oriented, but more history oriented. And I titled this little speech talk, Drinking Standing Up, which will touch the bases on that at the end. In 1971, I just finished grad school at Oregon State University in chemical engineering. Later that year, I became the quality control supervisor at Charles Krug Winery in St. Helena in the Napa Valley in California. At that time, there were about 25 wineries and wine brands in the Napa Valley. There are now about 600. Early in 1972, I became a production manager and winemaker at Krug, and later general manager of Robert Mondavi Enterprises. So I had worked for both the brothers for a while. Wine popularity grows, tastings, and medals. Almost 50 years ago, the world of wine, there were just three categories. In the world of wine, three categories. The good stuff, which was French, the very good stuff, also French, and everything else. Few doubted that anything could be finer than the vines in Bordeaux and Burgundy. And those at the upper end of wine snobbery were unshakably Francophiles. And then an event in May 24th, 1976, a notable event that would come to be known by the mythical name Judgement of Paris, dramatically changed the way wines were seen and sought. A highly respected British wine seller and educator, Stephen Spurrier, organized a blind tasting that put unlabeled French and California whites and reds in front of 9 French wine experts. What then happened was revolutionary. The French wine experts tasted 10 white and 6 reds, 6 California Chardonnays and 4 French white Burgundies, and then 6 California Cabernet Sauvignons and 4 French red Bordeauxs. To everyone's surprise, the 2 wines that came out on top were the Napa Valley, a 1973 Chateau Montelena Chardonnay, and a 1973 Stag's Leap Wine Cellars Cabernet Sauvignon. It is well known in the last 50 years that a new style of California winemaking has overwhelmed the industry, a style producing big, intense, quote-unquote, trophy wines. In attaining this new goal, wines also end up with higher alcohols, albeit very successful in wine tasting. They're often not well suited for dinner table. Following the Paris tastings, wine journals became popular. The Wine Spectator and Wine Enthusiast being prominent. They reviewed the wines and gave each a rating of 0 to 100. And when a wine was given a high rating, one would find colorful, what we call shelf talkers, next to the rated wines in the retailer's shelves. A message was things like Wine Spectator 98 Brand X Chardonnay, or whatever the brand was called. Traditionally, still wines have been classified into 3 groups, each describing when a wine is served with a meal. Wines served as cocktails or as appetizers before meals are sometimes referred to as refreshment wines. Dessert wines are sweet, full-bodied wines appropriately served after the entree with desserts or perhaps alone as an enhancement to a reflective mood in a quiet evening. A great majority of the world's wines are the third group known as table wines, and these are taken with the main part of the meal, and characteristic of this large and varied group of wines are geared to foods that accompany. Table wines are distinguished from one another by the great variety or varieties used in these productions and by the more subtle characteristics of the style which they are made. Just as the artist has the option of paint a landscape in a realistic, impressionistic, abstract, or other style, the winemaker has a wide choice of stylistic options. Style determines which of the many attributes of any great variety are to be realized in the final wine. The table wine group includes a vast array of wine styles. To describe the style of winemaking that best fits the table wine definition, I use the term complementary style, and we'll cover this more later. The overriding criterion on all the winemaking decisions is that of the finished wine to be complementary to food. To achieve a complementary wines, the primary emphasis is on wine balance. In order for a wine to be technically sound and enjoyable, the three components of acid, body, and alcohol must be in proper proportion. That is, each component must be balanced so that it is not too weak nor too strong in relation to the other two. In practice, what actually constitutes balance is subjective interpretation as such a major source of variety in winemaking styles. For most California wines, the body and alcohol content are deemed more important in balance considerations than acid content. The resulting wines are rich and full. Most European wines are balanced with the acid content as a dominating partner. The resulting wines tend to be elegant rather than full. I strongly feel that acid is the most important part of the wine balance. In fact, it is the backbone upon which all else is built. In my experience, if the acid content is high and evenly distributed, alcohol in body can be correspondingly greater without upsetting the balance. Acid balanced wines are necessary to the complementary style because of the acid in the wine that cleans the palate. High alcohol generally creates a dominating and tiring effect on the palate, which shows up after a few sips. Before starting Vichon Winery in 1980, over a period of several months, I had about 6 wine tastings and lunches in my home. Sitting around our dining room table, 6 people would taste 8 different wines. Equal numbers of French and California wines were put in each tasting. We tasted Sauvignon Blancs, Chardonnays, and Cabernet Sauvignons. The wines were tasted blind, scored, and rated. In 5 out of 6 tastings, a California wine won the blind tasting. Then we served a meal. I had planned with a caterer to accompany the wines we had just tasted. We had our meal and continued our meeting, and it was noticed that the wines that came in first at the tasting were not the favorite wine at the meal. A wine that came in, say, fourth at the blind tasting was preferred with the food. It was after the meal and only then that the wines were unmasked. Always the wines with higher acid, less oak, and less alcohol were first to be finished with the meal. And they were always French wines. The intent of these tastings and meals was to convince my partners and marketers of the style of wine I wanted to make and that the marketing message and concept to use. I made the Vichon wines lower alcohol, higher acid complementary style. I want to give you an idea of what the marketplace did. It was reported at that time that Robert Mondavi invented Fumé Blanc in California. Everyone knows that by producing a dry wine from Sauvignon Blanc in the style of a Pouilly Fumé, at the time when most California Sauvignon Blancs were off dry, like most California Chenin Blancs were, it became a huge success and was the #1 selling wine in American restaurants at the time. When I started selling Vichon Chevrignon, I would go to a fine restaurant in a market. I would order a light seafood lunch and a glass of Robert Mondavi Fumé Blanc. I had introduced myself to the restaurant owner and told my story. I had a lightly chilled Vichon Chevrignon in my possession. Halfway through the meal, I asked the restaurant owner if he'd like to taste the Robert Mondavi Fumé Blanc and the Vichon Chevrignon. They always tasted, always ordered our wine and put it on their wine list. How successful were we? It was reported in the wine press. Meanwhile, George Vierra started Vichon Winery and invented Chevrier Blanc, later called Chevrignon, a dry wine blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon a la White Graves. It soared in popularity and replaced Robert Melville Fumé Blanc as the #1 selling wine in U.S. restaurants. To describe the style of winemaking we have conceived and developed over these years, we use the term complementary style. The overall criterion of all of our winemaking decisions was that the finished wine be complementary to food. In designing this style, we paid particular attention to the physiology of eating and tasting process so that we could produce wines that integrated gracefully with dining. In general, our wines played down the characteristics such as excessive alcohol and oakiness, which lead to a sensory fatigue when wine is taken with a meal. Complementary wines seek to clean and refresh the palate so that the entire meal can be enjoyed without an accumulation of strong competing flavors. In this way, wines can bring out their natural ability to complement the best of foods and compensate the poor. These wines clean the palate due to salivation. To sum up, the style we developed, we called complementary style, meaning that all of our wines were designed to provide graceful additions to the table. This is achieved by developing a carefully modulated and acid balance, which results in a wine that complements food by refreshing the palate after each sip. Wine drinking standing up from the European perspective. Modern wines are increasingly drunk without food, standing up. Such a scenario calls for a certain type of wine, argues Hugo Rose, master of wine, and only New World producers are providing it. Drinking standing up is such a common practice that is no longer considered notable. Yes, wine is for meals, but in the last 5 decades has become much more. Wine is an aperitif, a party drink, a point at a wine bar, a bottle of Chardonnay in a fridge for a friend to drop by. Wine is all of these things. And as such, is consumed standing up as opposed to sitting at a dining table. It wasn't always thus. Some of us have memories of wine stretching back 50 years to before, when wines were not fresh and perky and did not titillate the taste buds in the way they do today. Wines then were to be drunk alongside a plate, knife and fork, sitting down. Social changes. The arrival in the early 1980s of an upfront, clean, highly aromatic, and refreshing wines coincided with the beginnings of the wave popularity of wine as a casual beverage drunk standing up. These wines had a democratizing effect as consumption was increasingly disassociated with the etiquette of formal dining, of wine service and selection. Not only were the food and wine matching strictures loosened, but the importance of drinking with any kind of food was diluted to the point where more and more drinkers, it hardly mattered. New World wines are auto-defined as user-friendly, whereas classic Old World wines are complex and specialized. It would not be surprising if it were to be found that the New World has done more than just contribute to, though it is largely a new market. It may well have come to dominate it. After all, the palate requirements for drinking standing up differ markedly from those required for sitting down. The former requires a wine with a bright primary fruit entry, an off-dry palate, non-existent tannins, and short finishes. Yes, short is preferable here. The wine must not be a conversation stopper. In contrast, wine drunk sitting down must offer a discrete entry, building complexity as long as finish as possible. The tannins and reds for the table excuse me, are positive, combining with the food proteins to cleanse the palate between mouthfeels. You can see where I'm going. The standing up profile is an almost perfect cipher for the middle of the road, New World wine style, whereas classic wines almost always match the sitting down model. This is hardly surprising when given the association of food and wine in most European wine regions. Very quickly, I want to give you a little about my background. I spent about 45 years in the Napa Valley, the heart of the California wine industry. I started wineries, managed wineries, consulted around the world, spent over 35 years an adjunct professor in the Department of Viticulture and Winery Technology at Napa Valley College. And I created a website with about 150 papers, lectures, and research, which basically will be distributed that anybody can use and pass on to friends. Wine is a fascinating subject. Obviously, having spent almost my entire life doing it, and I've also spent a lot of time teaching it. And I would be more than happy to answer anybody's questions. On my website, you can find a place where I have a little information on a resume, which has a telephone number and an email, and anybody, if they so choose, can reach out to me with a question.
Wonderful, George. Thank you so much for the story. I love the history that you bring to this program and this recording. Before we get into the Q&A, I would like to introduce the people that we have taking part in our recording today. First of all, guest, but one of the founding members of our club in Brockville, Canada, Chris Cochran. Chris with the District
Hey, Chris.
7040 Passport Club. Great having you. From our club, and strewn a bit geographically, here in California, we have in Sacramento our president this year, Mike Kane. We have on Catalina Island one of our newest members, Ernie Rodriguez. I am in San Jose. My name is Rushton. In Texas, we have Rory Olson. And in Germany, we have Manu Shamsrizi. And so thank you all for taking part in what we've got going today. As we start the Q&A, I would like to note that, George, as significant your experience is with the wine business, you recently celebrated your 56th wedding anniversary, and congratulations to you on that. That's a lot of credibility as well. So absolute style points on that.
Well, today's our anniversary, and we're ready to have a nice day.
So recently is like
I
this
want to give you
morning.
a little bit more background too. I grew up in Cambrian Park in the Santa Clara Valley. My wife was from Los Gatos. We both graduated as Spartans in 1968. I did graduate work at Oregon State when we got married in Corvallis. My wife Bobby commuted down to U of O and got a degree of library science. And so the last year before I got my PhD at the age of 25, she was actually working at the Oregon State University Library and reference librarian. So we got that very well. And she's an absolutely phenomenal artist too. So she's an artist. Um, and we both love the outdoors and natures. We're avid birders and things like that. So that's just a little bit of background.
I love the many kind of tendrils into the being that is California that you have. That's wonderful. So we're going to start with a question that came in from Chris. How does one know what food works best with any given wine? So for folks who are kind of in that space of like, how do I choose? Talk a little bit about that.
That is I think when one goes, one has to find a good source, and the best source is usually a wine seller retailer, somebody who indeed you work with, who you purchase your bottles from. And you have to describe to them as well as you can what you're eating. And in many cases, we know meals can have several different dishes, and they may not all have the same wine style need to do for their betterment. So that can be a problem. So you have to really, generally, it's the main course that one finds you're looking for to complement as best you can the wine, and vice versa. So you really do need the counsel of just a good wine merchant. I can't think of any other way. Or if you have a cousin or a friend who, even if you don't get along, every once in a while give them a call and ask the same question of them so that you can get an idea. But you really have to define pretty well, as anybody knows, just to say you're having chicken doesn't have anything to do with the fact that what you may use in the recipe. I mean, if you had lemon in it or didn't, obviously it's going to be a different type of a style. If you put cream in it, a different type of style of wine that one would want. So it's not a simple task. I've been doing it for almost 50 years and I don't always do it right.
I love that there is an added complexity that people have to appreciate in order to kind of get a job done well. I believe that so much about the history that you share gives lessons about understanding balance and varying strengths, and that's very much true for service clubs as well.
I would recommend anybody next time they have a glass of wine, they take a sip of it without the food and just watch and get the sense of salivation on the palate, because the pH of wine is usually around 3.5 or a little bit less. And what it'll do is once you put it on the palate and you swallow, it'll cause the palate to salivate. It's a salivation that cleans the palate. That's why you're going to be able to put another piece of the same dish in your mouth and taste it, because it won't be completely coated with the wine you're having, because the wine will help create salivation that will clean the palate. So the next time you're tasting a wine, just see if you can sense this. You should be able to sense the salivation you're getting on your palate when you swallow.
Nice. Mike has a question in the chat about your opinions on organic growing and that kind of impact on the wine industry.
I think organic, like everything, can be very specialized. In some cases, it can be very, very good. Uh, it's never, it's not a huge niche in the market in the wine industry. There are some very nicely made organic wines, and that's a matter again of going to your local wine merchant, uh, who's going to be your best friend, and ask them the same question: What are you? Are there any really new or to your shop any new organic wines you would recommend that we try? And again, the best thing is you need good counsel because there's so many wines now. There's millions of wines in the world, and to be able to really get an idea that you have a sense of what they're all about, you don't. Nobody does.
One thing that struck me as you were presenting is this idea that okay, here's this moment in the 70s when people really begin to understand that California has such a strong wine industry as well, and so it's not just France, right? The thought that struck me is that with the auto industry, there was Germany and there was Michigan, right? And then suddenly Japan was on the scene. But Japan, kind of got eclipsed by, places like South Korea. And so I'm wondering that in your time with wine, have there been places, maybe it's Western Australia, maybe it's South Africa, it could be anywhere, where the quality of wine has reached the level that you find in France and in Napa Valley.
I would say you probably can find what I would call world-class wines almost everywhere. You just have to look and find them because um, the ground upon which we grow grapes and the surrounding and the climates that there, that's the area that's called the microclimate. And so the microclimates vary all over the world, and the climates vary all over the world. And so, because of the fact that you're going to have a cooler area, an area without rain, you might find the acid level in the grape is going to be a little bit different. And you're going to then produce wines possibly that have a little bit higher acid in the balance than wines that are from warm regions. Like, for example, you can imagine the difference between growing over on the coast, Santa Cruz, for example, on the coast, or going over to Fresno and grow grapes. The grape style is going to be monsters, incredibly different. You're never going to be able to make a fantastic light Sauvignon Blanc to go with seafood with the grapes out of Fresno. It won't happen unless you wanted to artificially add acid, which many winemakers can do. And you can add tartaric acid or citric acid to the wine to quote unquote make the wine more balanced. It can be artificially balanced, but all food products in some way can be artificially changed by adding approved additives. And so that's would be the thing that one would do. But if you, I guess the point is just keep asking questions and finding out if there's something new coming on. And it doesn't a problem to it's not a problem to join wine clubs the same way one would grow something like we would join a Rotary. You're going to be able to transfer information from people and find sources of things. And I think you'll find it. Finding a bottle of wine is just as exciting as somebody who's been in for that's really exciting and new. It's just as exciting to somebody who's been in for 50 years as somebody who doesn't know anything about it. Because we're all
Mike,
basically human beings and we like to eat and drink. So why don't we want better things? We do.
there you go. Mike asks about the Paso Robles area and how you might compare it to the Napa area.
I have I have to admit I've had Paso Robles wines before, very much. But I would say they're probably the styles, the climates are pretty damn close between Napa with the Bay and Paso Robles. So you can get some very, very similar grapes growing. Depends on the variety. I think that you can't necessarily say that if you really want to taste great wines, you just go to taste the Napa. That's just not true. You're going to taste great wines all over the place, up and down the coast. From Alaska, they make some very, very nice wines. They even make some very, very nice wines in Baja California.
Well, I think that's probably a good place to wind down our recording time. So what I'll do is I'll finish up before handing it back to you, George. Everyone, thank you so much for taking your time to watch this and any of the recordings that we have shared. We're probably in the range of about 500 different stories from around the world at this stage in the almost 10 years of the Rotary eClub of Silicon Valley, making it possible for people who are crazy busy but have a heart for service to be part of an organization like Rotary. And we hope that you will take an interest in what we do. Join us as the different stories come out. We can put you on a list, the friends list that lets you know when we're going to do recordings, and we're happy for you to join in and to talk to these wonderful people we get to talk to. One of the advantages of doing that is the even after we finish the recording, when the speaker has time, we will keep asking questions that kind of like, I was kind of curious about this, and we'll be able to do that. Uh, do a couple of things for us. Leave a comment. If you are on our SiliconValleyRotary.com page, leave a comment towards the bottom about what you thought of this program or any other element of our meetings. The inspirational video, the learn something new video, the greeting from the president, the joke, anything that you run across that you find inspirational in some way, let us know. You can also tell us you are here. There's a little attendance button that you can follow and fill out a little form to just share that you were part of what we did today, and we hope you will do that. George, as we always like to do, we hand it back to the speaker for the final word. So, what would you like people to have clearly in mind as they finish up this podcast or video?
Keep your mind open and experiment and try new stuff. Always.
Man, perfect. Thank you, George, and thank you, everyone. We will see you next week.
Take care.